Hello, welcome back. This is Evan again. We're going to do another lab, and in this lab, we are going to deploy Active Directory on a virtualized environment using Microsoft Azure. Now, to do this, we're going to create two virtual machines, and on the first virtual machine, we are going to install an operating system that is a Windows server. We're going to take this Windows server and then basically turn it into a domain controller. And the way we do that basically is that once we install and configure Active Directory, now this server is considered a domain controller. And on this domain, we are going to create a domain, or actually on this domain controller, we're going to create a domain called mydomain.com. It could literally be anything, but that's the name of the domain that we're going to pick for the scope of this project. Once we've done that, we're going to take our second virtual machine and ensure that there's network connectivity between the two virtual devices, and we're going to take this client and add it under the domain. Okay, we're going to join it to the domain so that you can log in using a user that's within this domain on here. And then the final thing that we're going to do is we are going to create a group policy for any client that's within a group in this domain that we've created. And in that group policy, we're going to make sure, or we're going to enable remote desktop protocol on this specific one machine, so that any user within the group policy inside this domain can remote desktop into this device. I know, super technical, but all the people who understand what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and jump into the lab. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the first step of this lab, which is creating the resources that we're going to use inside Microsoft Azure. Now, I already have the portal for Microsoft Azure set up here, and the very first thing that we're going to do is create a resource group. And you see I have a resource group already here from a previous lab. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that because I don't need this. Great tip: if you're no longer using resources, make sure you delete them. Now, as that's deleting, we're going to go over here and create a new resource group. For this one, we're going to name it a name that's similar to the project, so Active Directory project, and that's perfectly fine. Now, I'm going to select the region as US East US because that is the region that doesn't really give me problems with this subscription that I have, this trial subscription I have with Microsoft Azure. I never really have any problems. Go ahead and move my face over there. Okay, we're gonna create this resource group. Now, within the resource group, we're gonna create our first machine. This machine is going to be our domain controller. In order to do that, we're gonna have to select a specific operating system that's gonna be on the virtual machine that we can install and configure Active Directory on. First, let's go ahead and name the virtual machine. We're going to name it DC1, DC meaning domain controller. We're going to take the availability options and make it no infrastructure redundancy required. That's outside the scope of this project. And for image right here, this is the operating system, right? Choose the base operating system or application for the VM. And for this image, we're going to click on the Windows Server 2022 Data Center Azure Edition, but we're mainly looking for the server right here. Like if we were going to do this on the 2019 server, it still has the same functionality for the scope of this project. We're going to leave the VM architecture on x64. We're going to leave the discount off, and the size of this VM, I know there's a lot of mumbo jumbo here, but we're only looking at really two key points, which is the 2 vCPUs and 16 gig memory. This is the V is for virtual, and then that is the central processing unit. So basically 2 processing units. That's all we need. That is more than enough for this project. And then we have 16 gigabytes of memory. Even though it says $232 per month, we're not going to be having this machine running for 30 consecutive days. We're really going to be having it running for maybe like an hour. And at this rate, if you were to do the math, that's like $18.20, no, not 18, 18 cents, 20 cents a minute. We're not going to run it. We're not going to run up that much money. We might end up spending like $1, $2, or $3 on this lab. So let's go ahead and make the administrator account. For the administrator account, we're going to name it lab user. We're going to create our password. sure they match, and then we're going to make sure the impound port is RDP3389. This is so we can remote desktop control this virtual machine. We're going to hit next. We're going to leave the disk the same. That's outside the scope of this project. And the virtual network, we're going to make sure they're giving us a virtual network. We're going to make sure that they're giving us a public IP address. This is very important. If we don't have a public IP address, we won't be able to RDP into this machine. Sometimes I don't know why Microsoft Azure doesn't automatically put public IP here, and usually if that happens, you can just click on create new and then name it whatever public IP you want to name it. But in this case, they've already done that for us. Now, if you look right here, you see we went through basics, disk, networking, management, monitoring, advanced, tags, review, and create. We really don't need to go through management, monitoring, and advanced. That's outside the scope of this lab. So instead of clicking next, we're going to click on review and create. And if you see what I said here earlier, it's about 31 cents per hour to essentially rent this virtual machine, and that is very, very cheap for what we're doing, right? We're not running this 24/7 for 30 days. So let's go ahead and create. Now this is going to take maybe 2 minutes for this virtual machine to deploy. You see deployment is in progress, and about 2 to 3 minutes is going to be completely deployed, but we're going to wait maybe like 10 minutes because we want the virtual network that is created to completely propagate. If you look here at DC, oh, actually I forgot to add it to the resource group. Okay, well that's perfectly okay, because whenever you create a resource for the first time, it usually automatically creates a resource group for itself. I usually make a resource group in the beginning just for redundancy, so this is not a big deal. We'll just make sure the next virtual machine is connected to this DC1 group, and if we click on that in a second, I'll show you why that's important. Click on the DC1 group. If we look at these resources right here, right, we have the virtual machine, public IP address, the network security group, this is the firewall, this virtual network. We need to make sure the second machine is inside the same group as this virtual machine so that it automatically adds them to the same virtual network. And I'll show you that in just a bit. So I'm going to let it pause right now, and then I'm going to come back when I'm making the second machine. Alright, welcome back. Now we can see that it has been fully deployed. If you look right here where I'm highlighting, it says the deployments have succeeded, and it's been a little bit of time has been passed, so I think this VNet should have fully propagated. So let's go ahead and create our second virtual machine. So we're going to go right here and click on services, virtual machines. We're going to create a new one, and for this one we're going to ensure that it is added to the correct resource group, which is DC1. If you remember, I had created this resource group, but I didn't select it, and it created its own resource group. So we're going to select the one that the domain controller is in. Okay, so now for a virtual one, we're going to name this client 1. Region will be in the same region. The redundancy will be no infrastructure required, and we are going to make the operating system just a simple Windows 10. This is not going to be a server. Now for the size, if you see, it's already pre-selected because I've done this lab many times. We have 2 virtual cores. We have 16 gigabytes of memory. Let's go ahead and make the administrator account. For the scope of this project, I like to keep the administrator account simple and easy to remember, because we're going to be going back and forth between these accounts. And make the password. Okay, RDP is selected. That's very important. We don't need to change the disk. And if you look at the virtual network here, this is very important. Some people skip this part, right? We got to ensure that it's connected to the virtual network that the domain controller is connected to. And right now, it is not showing up the other virtual network. And all that means is that we didn't wait enough time, and that's not a big issue. We just got to wait a little bit longer for the VNet of the domain controller to propagate, and then we're going to come back and we're going to be able to. So I'll see you in a sec. Alright, now we're back, and if you can see right here, now the virtual network is showing the DC1 VNet. This is a really important part making sure we have network connectivity. The public IP address is going to be a unique public IP address. The NIC security group will be basic. Public inbound ports will also be RDP. This is very important. And then everything else that's outside the scope of this particular project. So we're going to just skip management, everything else, and go to review and create. The default settings will be more than enough for this project. All right, and now we can go ahead and create the VM. Now we're gonna let this deploy, and then once it's fully deployed, I'll be right back. Now we have our second virtual machine completely deployed. You can see we're inside on the top left, and we're in the DC1 resource group. And if you look over here on the right, you see the deployments 2 have succeeded. And we have a lot of mumbo jumbo here. We have a lot of resources. So let's kind of make sense of this so you can understand, right? So we have 2 disks. This is our storage disk, virtual storage disk. We have 2 network interface cards, or we also call this NICs. If you look at the name, one is the NIC of the client virtual machine, and the other one is the network interface card of the domain controller virtual machine. 2 network security groups, those are our firewalls, 2 public IP address, 2 virtual machines, and guess what? 1 virtual network, because both of these machines are going to be operating within this VNet. Now let's remote desktop into our, we're going to do it into our client 1, which is not the domain controller, and we're going to see if there is a network connection between both of these virtual machines. So let's go ahead and do that right now. First thing that we're going to do is open our remote desktop application, and we are going to go back into our client 1, and we are going to grab the public IP. Now we clicked on public IP. I actually meant to click on the virtual machine, but this is okay because we're essentially looking at the public IP anyway. And now we're going to add this PC, and we are going to be prompted to give in our user credentials, and our user credentials, we created that when we created the virtual machine. And we're going to be able to log in. Now we are logging into our client 1 machine. Okay, we're gonna take off all these services. These services are not needed. Go ahead and hit accept. You can just hit continue. Every time you log in with a new user on a Microsoft Windows account, a Microsoft Windows machine is always going to prompt you with the web browser to do these things. Very simple. We're just going to click through it and then close all that out. We don't need any of that stuff. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the command prompt, and we're going to ping the other machine on this network to ensure that there is network connection. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go to the virtual machine, and we're going to check, see what its private IP address is. Once we know its private IP address, we're going to change the setting from that IP address from dynamic to static. And the reason why we want to change it from dynamic to static is because we're also going to configure that server as a DNS server, and we don't want that private IP address to change, because whenever this computer is going to resolve any domain name, we're going to make sure the DNS server is always on the same private IP address. So let's go ahead and let's go get the private IP address of domain controller 1, DC1. Go home to the DC1 group, and we're going to click on the virtual machine. Actually, we should have clicked on the NIC card. So let's go back and let's click on the NIC card, even though we could see the private IP address right here, DC NIC card. Now you see the private IP address is right here. That is what we're looking for, and we're going to copy that to our clipboard. But before we do that, we are going to go to IP configurations, and if you notice, the private IP address is dynamic, which means the private IP address can change. We are going to figure that. See, I meant to click this, and just change that to static. Okay, that's gonna. All right, successfully updated. Now that we got the private IP address, we're gonna check the network connection to see if the domain controller and the client 1 can communicate between each other. So we're in the command prompt. This is client 1. We are on client 1, and we are going to ping domain controller. Okay, so that -T is going to put a perpetual ping. So essentially we're sending an ICMP packet to the domain controller, and normally you would see an ICMP packet come back, but instead what we're seeing is request timed out. Now what that's telling us is that the domain controller is blocking our packets. So it might be receiving our packets, or basically the inbound firewall on that computer is blocking all ICMP packets. So now we're gonna keep this RDP open, this desktop open, and we're gonna open another desktop on the domain controller and change a firewall setting so we can ensure that there's network connectivity. Okay, so I just remote desktop into our domain controller, and if you notice, what we're looking at is a lot different than the regular Windows machine. We're looking at the server dashboard. We have a file and storage services, the local services, and then also all services showing our roles in our server groups. Usually when we refresh this or we wait a while, you'll see that these messages, these error messages, are going to go away as it's configuring in the background. But we're going to minimize this for now, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into the firewall and change some settings. Because if we go back on our desktop, you see the requests are still timing out because I put it on a perpetual ping, still timing out. So we're going to go on the domain controller here, firewall, advanced security, and we're simply going to go to inbound rules. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can take a better look at it. Okay, now there's a lot of different rules that some are enabled by these green checks, some are not enabled. So to get the one that we're looking for, we're going to sort them by their protocol, and we're looking for the ICMP v4, and we have 4 already right here. If you look on the right, it says ICMP v4, and we're going to enable all of these we're going to enable these firewall rules to allow ICMP packets. Rule, enable rule, enable rule, and enable rule, only for the scope of this project. Now, because this is a server, whenever you install an operating system that is a server, it already comes with the maximum security as default settings. So some settings that would normally be on a regular Windows machine, you will not find it on a server. For example, if I try to go to the internet here, it's already given me some notifications about the security that's already enabled on here, right? So it's asking me, hey, do you want to use recommended security and privacy compatibilities, or don't use them? Okay, for a server, you want to have the maximum security because this is obviously a critical part of the environment. Okay, and if I try to go to a website here, it's already telling me it's blocked. See that? Anyway, let's go back here, and we've had these firewall rules enabled for a bit now. So if we go back to our client, we should see that those packets are basically receiving messages back. And if you look now, we're seeing replies. See, if I scroll up here, it was saying timed out, but ever since I enabled the firewall ICMP packets, now we're seeing replies. So this is great. This is essentially showing that we have network connectivity between our client and our domain controller. Okay, on to the next step. Now that we've made sure that there's network connectivity, let's go ahead and get out of this firewall and install Active Directory on this Windows server. Okay, you notice how I hit refresh, our messages have gone away, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a role or feature, right? This is the installation wizard. We're going to click on role-based or feature-based installation. We are going to select the server from the server pool, which is this one, DC1, IP address, the one that we've selected as static, and we have many different roles that we can install on this particular server, but the one that we're looking for is Active Directory Domain Services, right? ADDS. We're going to add features, and that's pretty much it, because this is already configured to install the one that we're looking for, right? Oh, one last thing, we're going to add an additional feature, right, which is containers. This is going to be important because we're going to create containers for employees, for admins, clients. This way we can do our group policy. So let's go ahead and hit next, and we are going to restart destination server automatically if required. All right, hit yes, do allow automatic restarts, and then go ahead and install. Now this is going to install, and this virtual machine is going to restart, and I'll see you once it's finished restarting, finished installing. Now we're back, and you can see that the installation has succeeded on DC1. It still says some configuration is required. Now this is a success right here. This is exactly what we were looking for. Now it is already restarted. We can go ahead and close this, and the configuration that it's referring to is essentially promoting a domain controller. Technically, the server isn't a domain controller yet, even though I've been referring to it as the domain controller. It's not technically a domain controller until we've promoted it as one, and that's what we're about to do. Right, so the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to this flag, right, and it says post deployment configuration required for Active Directory domain services at DC1, and essentially is giving us the option to promote this server as a domain controller, just like I said. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to promote this as the domain controller, and we are going to add a new forest. This is a whole entire new forest. Another way that you can think of forest is just where all of the devices, all of the users are going to be connected, and then this is the head of the forest. Okay, so the root domain name is going to be mydomain.com. We can name that anything, but for the sake of this project, we are going to keep it at just that. Now let's go ahead and make our password. Okay, next, for the DNS options, we are not going to do DNS delegation, and the reason why is because we want this server to be the DNS. We're going to let the net BIOS set up. Okay, next, okay, we're going to keep the path same for the database folder, the log folder, and that the same. View our options, everything looks good. We're going to do some prerequisites. Everything should be checked successfully. Yeah, here we go, checked successfully, everything passed successfully, so we can go ahead and install it. Okay, now Active Directory has been installed, and as you can see, we're about to be signed out because this computer needs to be restarted. Right, our session was disconnected. Marvelous. Now we're going to wait a bit and let it fully restart, and then we're going to remote desktop back into the domain controller. Now, because we have installed Active Directory on that domain controller and we have set up a domain called mydomain.com, we can log in as a user on that domain by doing this. Watch. So lab user 001 at mydomain, and because we've created the Active Directory on this user will automatically be inside that domain. So we can go ahead and log in. And voila, now we are logging in through Active Directory, and right now the domain is attempting to make sure that our account is actually in the domain. All right, we are logged in now, and we are going to minimize the server management, and we are going to go to Active Directory users and computers, also known as ADUC. You can see we have my domain here. This is the domain that we've created. We have some built-in folders, and we are going to create 2 new organizational units. This is just a fancy way of saying group, and first one is going to be admins. Make it all admins. Second one we are going to make is going to be clients. Clients meaning computers, clients meaning hosts, clients meaning devices, a lot of different. And then we're going to make another one which is employees. Marvel. Now that we have 3 new organizational units, we are going to add, actually before we even do that, I'm going to show you how, if we look in users, you can see this user that we have, right? This is the one that we just used to log in, and then we also have a guest user, but there are no other users. So let's make a new user, and we're going to name this person Jane Doe, and then their login will be Jane _add, right? And if you notice, you see the domain name here. This is the net BIOS name. We're going to hit next. We're going to assign password, and we're going to untick this user must change the password at the next login, but normally you would do that when you're creating an account for somebody. Depends on your password policy. Okay, we've just created a new user. You can see her here, Jane Doe, and we're going to add her into admins, right? Yes, we do want to. Now that we've added her into admins, this doesn't mean that she's an admin because the properties of her account is still under default user setting. What we need to do is right click her name, go to properties, And if you look right here at member of, you see the groups that she's in. She's part of the domain users. We're going to add her to a new group. We're going to write domain. We're going to check the names, and it's going to show us domain admins. This is what we want to do. We want to add her to the admins group. Okay, we're gonna hit OK. We're gonna hit apply, and now this account is an admin of the domain, and this is now the account that we're gonna use going forward as we configure our other clients when we add them to this domain, when we're updating the group policies and all that jazz. Alright, so we're doing a phenomenal job. We've configured Active Directory on our domain controller. We've ensured that our DC1 virtual machine and our client 1 virtual machine, they have network connectivity between each other. And on our domain controller, we've created our domain. So now only thing that's left to do is to take our client 1 virtual machine and connect it or put it under our domain, and we're about to go ahead and do that right now. So let's go ahead and check out our DC1. We haven't been here in a while. Say hello. Now you might think all we need to do is go to the settings and then add it to the domain by changing the settings on this machine, but it won't work like that. And the reason why is because the name of our domain is not an actual domain that we're using on the public internet. We're only using this on a private network. And whenever we try to put mydomain.com in the settings of this computer, the DNS server that this computer is using will be like, okay, where is mydomain.com? And it'll check its cache of knowledge and it'll send us somewhere else. And that's not what we want. So essentially what we need to do is we need to change the DNS server of this computer to the server that we just created. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Okay, here we are back inside the resource group, and what we're looking for is to configure the network interface card of client 1. So let's click on client 1 and we can go to DNS servers, and if you notice, what's checked is that it's already inheriting it from the virtual network. Essentially, whenever you create a virtual computer on Microsoft Azure has an invisible DNS server in the background, which is what the computers are using, and we're going to change that to custom. The DNS server is going to be IP address, and this IP address is the domain control. You notice how we changed that to static earlier, so now we're going to go ahead and save this. Alright, now you can see on the top right is just successfully saved the settings that we just configured here. What we're going to do now is we're going to restart that client machine, go to the virtual groups, TC1 group, and then the virtual machine client here. We're going to restart this computer. Yes, starting the virtual. Now we're going to lose our remote desktop connection to this machine, and then once it's fully restarted, we are going to go ahead and jump in. I'll see you once that's finished. Okay, now we're back and we've just completely restarted this client 1 virtual machine. We just updated the settings of the machine so that the DNS server points to our domain controller. Our domain controller is now the DNS server. Okay, if you're not technical, I don't know how you're following along. Okay, so we need to add this to the domain, and that's pretty simple. What we're going to do is we have to go to our settings, and what we're looking for is the about. Let me move my face out of the way, right? About this computer. And here we are, about. Now, this, if you don't really know, if you've never done this before, it's not really intuitive to know where add this to the domain, but you know, look at this. What would you click on to add this to the domain? What would you do, right? You go here, would you click on device manager? Maybe you click device manager, right? Maybe you click remote desktop, right? But no, you would be wrong. You would click on rename this piece advanced. I know, not intuitive at all, but that's what we have to do. And then even if you click that, like, where do you click? All right, computer name, hardware, advanced, system protection, remote, like, what do? Right? You have to read this right here to rename this computer or change its domain. It's not very intuitive, but that's really what you would do. And we're going to add member of domain. We're going to write mydomain.com. We're going to click OK. And now we're going to log in as an admin. And if you recall, we've already created an admin, which is Jane admin. We're going to put in the password. And super simple, super easy, as long as you know where to look. Okay, welcome to mydomain.com domain. Go ahead and hit OK, and it's going to prompt us to restart this computer again. Okay, it looks like it's still loading up. Let's go ahead and wait for that. Okay, you must restart your computer to apply the changes, and let's go ahead and do it again. Restart now. Bam. Okay, so now that computer is restarted, what we're going to do before we go back into client 1 is we're going to go to the Active Directory users and computers, and we're going to ensure that it was actually added to the domain. So let's click on refresh, and then we are going to go to computers, that up. And if you see, we have client 1 here now inside of the computers file. Let's go ahead and drag that into the group I made earlier, or organizational unit. And we are going to change the group policy for every single client that is within this organizational unit. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that group policy for clients right now. And just so we're clear, the group policy that we're making is essentially we're allowing any clients that is a part of this group right here, we're going to allow any user within the domain to remote desktop into the client. So right now only the admin can remote desktop into this client, and if we have another user like let's say an employee over here and they want to, you know, they need to use that computer for whatever reason, right now they will not be allowed to remote desktop into this client. Now this isn't normally what would happen in a work environment, but for the sake of this project to show how we can configure different group policies within Active Directory, we're essentially gonna make a group policy for this group right here. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to the group policy management dashboard, and we have the forest here, which is the my domain. We created this, and we have the domains that we're gonna click on, and the same settings that we had over here inside the Active Directory is also over here in the group policy. Now we want to add a policy for clients, so we're going to right click on this and create a new GPO. GPO stands for group policy. We're going to name it remote desktop. Okay, hit OK. Now we're going to right click our policy and we're going to edit it. The first thing that we're going to do is computer configuration. Then we're going to go through policies. We're going to go through administrative templates, Windows components. We're going to look for remote desktop. I think I passed remote desktop services, remote desktop session host, and then finally connections. I know if you haven't done this before, it's almost like walking through a maze. This is why doing projects over and over and over again really allows you to like get what. Now for this, we are going to enable this setting right here, which is allow users to connect remotely by using remote desktop service. Go ahead, edit that. We're going to click enabled, apply, okay, and as you can see, it is now enabled. Yay. Now if we go all the way back to our policies folder right here, right, instead of clicking administrative templates, if we click Windows settings, security settings, local policies, and then user rights assignment, we can also change the policy here. And this one is just a little bit different because we can essentially add the name of a specific user or a group of users. For example, if I write domain, check the names, we can just add all the domain users just like that. That may be something that we want to do. We may not want to do it. It depends on the organization. For this project, we'll only put domain add. Go ahead and hit apply. And now we've just created a policy that only affects the domain add. Okay, so now that we've created the policy, what we're going to do is force update all of the clients that are connected to this domain. So we're going to go to the command prompt and we're going to run this as administrator, and then we're going to write gp update / force. GP means group policy. All right, so now the computer policy has been completed successfully. We can end this and we're going to test to see if the policy that we've updated is going to work. Let's end our group policy management and this here, and now any client that we have within this client group will be able to remote desktop control this any other client that's in this group. But what we're going to do, we're going to create another admin. This one will be John Doe. Put our password, Now we've just created another admin, but first we're going to change the properties of this person, and we're going to add this person to the admin. Now both of these users will be able to remote desktop into any client machine, and any client machine can remote desktop into any other client machine as long as they're in this organizational unit. If I were to make another organizational unit and remove this client from it, then no other clients can remote desktop into it. That is a group policy that only applies to this group right here. So let's go ahead and connect to this client. Let's go ahead and do it. All right, so let's go ahead and see if we can remote desktop into this using the new user that we just created. And we should be able to log into client 1 using this new user. And it looks like we can log in. And voila, we've logged in. We have successfully added this client into the domain on our DC, our domain controller. We've established a group policy that allows all of the clients within a specific group to remote desktop into each other. And we've also made a group policy that allows all admins to remote desktop into these clients. And look at that. And you know that it's worked properly because this is a new user that's logged into this domain. They're giving us the default Windows settings for the internet browser. We can just cut through all that out. Marvelous. But let's do one more thing, one more bonus little exercise. We're gonna make a whole bunch of users with a PowerShell script, and then we are going to create another group policy and then log into this machine one more time without using an admin, but with using a regular user. Okay, here we are back inside the domain controller. You can see that we have Active Directory, users and computers up here. What we're going to do is create 1,000 fake employees using a PowerShell script. You might have noticed I have a text edit document right here, and we're going to paste in the PowerShell script right here. It says 10,000, but actually we're going to do 1,000. Go ahead and save this document. Oops. And we are going to use PowerShell to run this command, but not the regular PowerShell. We're going to use ISE right here. We're going to run that as administrator. And this is going to allow us to run our script. New script, paste, and we're going to make sure this is 1,000 again. And now this script is going to create random first name, random last name. They're all going to have the same password. And once all of these users are created in the employees group, we're going to make another group policy that allows them to remote desktop into any client. So let's go ahead and run this script. And now you can see we're creating users all with randomly generated names. If you look over here at the line, this will give you a good idea on how many users were created. It's not completely accurate because this is counting the lines of the script, so this is also adding in, you know, the first couple of lines that's saying what's going on. And then once this gets to 1,000, we're going to refresh Active Directory and we'll see 1,000 employees. Look at that. All right, it looks like it's complete. Let's minimize that and the notepad. Come over here to my domain and let's refresh. Now if we click employees, we have all of these users, right? And we've also configured their password. So let's go ahead and create another group policy for employees. Remote desktop enabled. Let's edit this group policy. Okay, now we're going to enable this policy. Allow users connect remotely. You can just double click it, hit enable, apply, bada boom, bada bing. And we have one more setting to configure. Okay, we can actually back out of that now that we've created that group policy, right? If you look at the organizational unit for employees, we have one group policy. We also have a group policy for client. But because we have them added on employees, now we can take any one of these users, or actually employees that we have inside this organizational unit, and attempt to log into our client virtual machine. Let's see how it works. And if we've done everything correctly, this demonstrates some of the capability of Active Directory and some of the capability of applying a group policy and essentially updating many machines all at the same time. We can also install programs on many machines at the same time. We can configure updates. So let's go ahead and pick one of these to log into. Oh, before we do that, we need to do a force update across all group policies. P update force. Go ahead and update the policy. Okay, so let's pick one of these users. Let's right here. Right, this is their display name. Copy that. We're gonna sign out of our client one machine, and then we're gonna log back in with the user domain. Put in their password that we created using the PowerShell script. All right, and here we are. We have logged in perfectly well. Bam. So that goes ahead and demonstrates just how we're logging in on a user that we just created inside an employees group. We can call them group, but in technical terms for Active Directory, it wasn't a group, it was called an organizational unit. We've applied several different group policies. We've installed Active Directory on a server, and that's the end of this project. I really appreciate you spending all this time with me. I'll see you in the next project. Take care.